Hi, sorry this is a bit late, but I'm here. I'm trying. I am trying to be consistent. It's going to work. A little bit late. Next week I'll be on time because to be honest, I hate being late for anything. Now, the reason I wanted to tell our story is because, as I've said before, I'm nearly 73 and Mari is 61. And I don't say to people she wasn't born to me. I just say she's my daughter. Sometimes I can see them doing the maths. Um, And I don't say anything, but I can see them wondering and dying to ask what the situation is or how did I cope so young at the age of 12 having a baby. But to explain that story, I'd have to go into my past just a little bit. I was born one of 8 children into a strict Catholic family. My mum, by the time she was 34, she'd had 8 children. The firstborn, Michael, died a cot death of 5 months, and then she went on to have 5 girls and 2 boys. So it was a noisy family, but very strict Catholics, confession on a Saturday and Holy Communion on a Sunday and all holy days. And but we survived. We survived. So when I was about jumping ahead a bit now, when I was about 14, no, I was when I was 13, I sat next to a girl in school and she was in a really unhappy foster home. And they really were quite cruel to her. So after school, we used to save our dinner money. Our parents thought we were going to a netball match, and we'd get the bus into the city centre to the children's department and complain to the social worker. And really, he'd come out of his office and he'd look at us and he'd roll his eyes and he'd say, just go back and try once more. So he must have got sick of the sight of looking at us over the next few months because we went down there constantly. We weren't going to give up. Well, I wasn't anyway. And my friend was given a new social worker, a female social worker, which was great. And then my auntie, Terry, who was like a second mum to me, my mum's sister, she became a foster mother. So it all worked out quite well. But it gave me an insight into childcare, and I did have a special interest in children. And I was very lucky when I was 16. I got a job at Nazareth House Children's Home, which is across the River Mersey in Birkenhead. So I used to sleep there during the week, and on my days off, I'd go back on the ferry over to Liverpool. And I really did enjoy it. I loved working with these little children. They were all there for all different reasons. Some mothers were prostitutes, some mothers had died, just different reasons. But when you took them into bed of a night, they were like happy little souls. But the only bugbear was the nun in our nursery. She was horrible. She was bad tempered and miserable. And she had everybody jumping. And I remember one morning going into the toddlers' unit. It was breakfast time, and they were sat at the kitchen table in the dark, and they were all eating. So as I opened the door, I reached for the light, and they all shouted, "Hi, Shelf! Hi! Just pleased to see a familiar face." And this nun shouted, "Quiet!" And all the spoons went down. She said, "I am the mother of this house, and don't you forget it." And talking to little children like that. Anyway, in the end, I complained about her and she got moved, and it was great because we had a lovely atmosphere. We had a new nun, and all the kids were dead happy. So one day, one of the nurses said to me, "Why don't you do your nurses training?" So I said, "Well, where would I go?" Well, she said, "Well, there's a convent in Bristol that does the course." So I just jumped at the chance because my elder sister, Kathy, was a student there. So I wrote to the Reverend Mother in Bristol, and then she replied a few days later offering me the job. So I was absolutely thrilled. So not long before I left, one of the nuns was clearing out this shed, and there was an old chest, travel chest. She was slinging it on to go into a skip. And I said, "Oh, sister, could I have that, please?" She just looked at me. So anyway, I got one of the staff to come out. It was a lovely sunny afternoon, and we scrubbed it, just scrubbed all the muck off it. And then sister went in and got us some brasso and some rags, and we polished all the corners and the locks, the padlocks and everything. And it was gorgeous. So not before long, when I left the convent, the trunk followed. I put labels on the trunk and it followed me. And for years after that, that black trunk followed me everywhere I went. And each time I left a place, there was more stuff in it. And it was great because it just followed me everywhere. It had all my stuff. Anyway, when I arrived at the Bristol Commons, it was so different to Birkenhead. It was a gorgeous, big, huge grounds and trees, and you could hear the birds singing, and it was absolutely gorgeous. So I was met by one of the nuns, and she took me into the convent, and I slept in the convent with the nuns, but I was on the top floor. There was just one room in an attic. It went from the floor to 2 bedrooms to 1 bedroom, and I went up on the top. And she said to me, "Will you mind being here on your own?" And I said, "Oh, sister, I'm one of 8, 7. I'd love to be alone. I'd love some time alone." So anyway, that afternoon she took me over to meet everybody. And the children's home was separate, about 200 yards from the convent, and it just had toddlers on the ground floor, nursery in the middle, and the toddlers slept on the top floor. So we went into the kitchen where 2 staff were, Joan and Gina, whatever their names were, and sister introduced me. They were talking when we went in, and they just looked at me really and said hello and then turned away, no interest or anything really. And I'm quite a sensitive thing. I could tell that they didn't like me straight away. So we went into the nursery then, and it was full of little babies. They were like tiny balls of fluff. They came into the nursery from 6 weeks old from 6 days old to 6 weeks when they were usually adopted. So there was one little girl in the corner of the nursery in a big metal cot, and a rope was tied around a pipe to stop her tipping it over. And she sat looking through the bars like this. And I said to sister, "Who's this?" And she said, "Oh, this is Mari. She's 5. She said she's been here since she was a baby, but nobody will take her, and she has nowhere to go. So we're waiting for a bed in a big hospital." Oh, and I looked at this little girl, and she just looked. She didn't reach out when we went over to her to be picked up or anything. She just looked. And as we left her and walked around the nursery, you could see her eyes following us through the bars. Oh, and I just felt so sad for her. So anyway, I went back to my room after that and unpacked and settled in. The next morning I went on duty, probably about 7:30. And the 2 friendly nurses were there. So I went in and said good morning, ready to start work. And they said to me, "Could you see to Mari, please?" And I said, "Is that the little girl in the cot?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I don't really know her. You see, I'd never really looked after a handicapped child before. I didn't know what to do. And she didn't know me either." So they said, "Just pick her up and take her into the bathroom and dress her. There are nappies on the ledge." So I went into her bedroom, and she sat there, and when I reached out to lift her up, oh, the delight in her face, and picked her out of a cot, and she clung to me like a little monkey. And we went into the bathroom, and there was a long locker with like a big padded cushioning where you lay the babies and changed everybody. We went right across the room. So I sat Mari on the locker, and I went to take her nightdress off, and these 2 hands got into my hair. I mean, really gripped my hair. And I said to her, "Oh, let go, you naughty girl, let go." And she wouldn't, she just gripped harder. So I was shouting for help because I lifted her off the floor thinking as I lifted her, she'd automatically let go. But she didn't, she clung on even harder. So I lowered myself to the floor, and I'm actually lying on the floor with her hand in my hands. Her hands in my hair. So I'm shouting, and then next thing, Sister Alfred comes in. "Let go, you little devil, let go, you little devil," she's saying to her. And the 2 nurses come in, and they're all trying to unclench her hands from my hair. So they eventually did it. They sat her up on the locker. And Sister said to me, "Did nobody tell you to watch your hair, Michelle?" I said no. And my hair was really bushy. She must have loved my hair. So they still left me to see to her. So I dressed her, but I never took my eyes off her hands. And she knew. I said to her, you dare pull my hair again." Anyway, I lifted her off the locker when she was ready. I took her into the kitchen, and she was sat in a high chair with the legs sawn off. So they gave me a little bowl of baby cereal to feed her with, and they dropped a tablet in, and I said, "What's that?" And they said, "That's a Librium, just to keep her calm." She'd been on it since she was 3. So we stirred it's a sedative, isn't it, or whatever. Stirred it into a bowl and began to feed her. And she let me feed her okay, we was kind of settled. I knew what to look out for. Just watch those bloody hands. So when she'd finished, the nurse said to me, "Take her down the hall and put her in the end room on the right." So I followed her instructions. I carried Mari on my hip down to the room. When I opened the door, it was a big room, but it was full of, the old-fashioned prams, the big baby prams. Right around it was a pram storeroom. And I thought, oh, I must have got it wrong. So I took her back and I said, "I think I got the wrong room. Where did you mean?" So she said, "The end room at the right with the prams in. Just put her on the floor and close the door and she'll be fine." I said, "Just leave her in there on her own like that." They said, "Yes, just put her down, she'll be fine." Oh, so I took her down to this room and she's clinging on to me going down the hall. I lowered her onto the floor and immediately she crashed her head onto the ground, and she had this big scab on her head, and I wondered what it was because as soon as she crashed her head, the scab came off and the blood started coming down her face. So I went back. I said, "I can't leave her in there." They said, "Just close the door." Very authoritative. "Close the door and leave her, and she'll quieten down." So I was really sad, to give you jobs to do then. Of course, the priority in the convent is the bloody polished floors, polished to death, really. And instead of us spending time with the kids, we would spend time, as soon as they were fed or bathed, those basic needs met, we were cleaners. And, you'd have the big wax carton and the mop and go along it, putting the wax on it and then going back over it, polishing it. And all this time, I could hear this little girl in this room and the thump, thump, thump on the floor. So when Sister came back from chapel, I said, "Does she stay in there all day, Sister?" So she said, "She's fine, Michelle." I said, "Yeah." I opened the door. I said, "Look at her." She said, "Just come on away and leave her alone. She'll be fine. She'll be fine." She said, don't you be worrying." But I wasn't worried. I was just so disgusted with them all. So the pattern began where you have 2 hours off in the day because you do a long day. So you either 10 to 12 or 12 to 2. So I said to Sister, "Can I take her with me when I'm off, Sister, just for the 2 hours?" So she, if you want. So I couldn't wait. As soon as my time was up, I was in that room, picking her up off the floor and out that home. And I had to go past the nurse's the chapel to get to my room. So she's so delighted, squealing and squeaking, and she's on my hip. So as I'm walking past the chapel, I had to put my hand over her mouth, and so that the nuns wouldn't hear her, because you weren't allowed to take children into your room. So and then I took her up into my room. So this was like the foundation for our relationship, really, because if on my days off I kept her with me, I went and collected her and kept her with me, and on my time off I took her to my room. So she wasn't left. She was hardly left alone. She began to walk. She began to sing nursery rhymes, Baa Baa Black Sheep. In my room I had a big mirror, and she'd sit on the floor and watch herself, go right to it and look at her nose, open her mouth to see what was inside, just exploring with everything. So I get, they kind of accepted the stuff. That I was determined not to leave her, and that she could stay with me whenever I was off, which was a lot of the time. So anyway, after a few months, the Home Office came to adopt them, and slowly the beds were emptying. No more babies came in, and all the children started to stop that there. I thought, I'll have to tell Sister, this doctor, that she can she's learned to sing and she's learned to walk and she's eating a little bit better because she was fed on baby cereal. So anyway, the day came and the ambulance came for us, and oh, I was so excited. I borrowed clothes from the toddler's floor, and I took her in the ambulance. We went to the children's department, and we went in, and of course, in those days, they were quite ignorant, the doctors. So we went in and sat down, and the doctor continued to write, this elderly lady doctor. And she had other students with her because it was a teaching hospital. So she eventually looked up, checked the note, checked the name and everything and that, and how is she getting along? And I said, oh, she's doing very well. What's her diet like? I said, she has baby cereal, does she go to school? Oh, no. Anyway, after about a few minutes, she said to me, this child has been neglected and she's not going back with you. Oh my God, I was so shocked because I thought she'd see a difference in her, but maybe she hadn't seen it before. I just thought she'd see the improvement and think, oh, she could go to residential school because she's able to learn. I just thought she'd go on to have a better quality of life because at the moment there was nowhere for her to go and it had to be decided. Anyway, a nurse came in, a ward sister, and told me to follow her. Oh my God, and I just started crying. I was just so shocked. So I followed this ward sister down the corridor and we went to this ward and I just started sobbing. And she was saying to me, oh, she'll be okay, don't worry about her. And I said, but nobody knows her. She's, nobody knows what she's been through. So she said, look, I said, well, can I come in tomorrow and see her? And she said, yeah. So I later learned that nurses came out to see Mari and they were saying to me, oh, don't cry, she'll be all right. They all thought I was one of the children from the home because I suppose I was 17. So I went home, and I told Sister Alfred what they'd done. I said, oh, I thought they'll send Reverend Mother with a car to bring her back. She's going to say, don't you dare take one of my children like that. But the message came back to me that was that Reverend Mother said, oh, maybe they'll find her somewhere to live. So you can't blame them in a way because they had this child. Nobody was supporting them. They didn't know how to look after her. She was just neglected. She wasn't abused, really. She was neglected. So the Home Office came and they condemned the children's home and said that it had to be closed down. So there was no going back for Mari anyway. And all the children started to get moved to other convents around the country. The babies stopped coming in. And the beds emptied, the cots emptied. And I just continued to visit Mari whenever I could. I stayed with my sister Kathy and I went to the hospital every day. And then I took Mari back one day to see the nuns just to say goodbye, and it was so sad because it was empty. And they gave me 2 carrier bags with her clothes and kissed her goodbye. So, and that was the last I saw of the nuns as well. So, I mean, it was 6 o'clock at night and it was October, and there was a car there. There was a nun's car there. It wasn't the nuns that wouldn't drive her. It was the Reverend Mother. She wouldn't allow it. So I walked out carrying Mari down to the bus stop, which was a good way away from the convent. And I think it was raining. And a couple stopped in the car and asked me if I wanted a lift. They saw me carrying her and she looks heavy and that. So we got in the car and they took us all the way up to the hospital to St. Michael's Hill. And in we went. So one day this social worker comes into the ward and says hello and hello to Mari, and she says hello to me like she knows me. She doesn't. She's just heard a lot about me because I've been looking after Mari. And she said, oh, we've got a bed for her in Taunton. And she said it like I would clap. She said, we've got a bed for her in a big hospital in Taunton. Well, oh God, my heart sank. And she said, she's going next Monday. Would you like to accompany her? And I said, well, no, I wouldn't like to accompany her, but I'll go anyway. And I did say to her, where have you been? Where were you when she was in the home? Why weren't you going to visit her? And I think she was taken aback. So It was with a heavy heart that I left that hospital, and now it was another journey, another new journey for her, a new home. So on the Monday, I arrived on the ward and she was ready to go. And this social worker drove us in the car from Bristol right down to Taunton. And it was a place just outside Taunton called Bishop's Lydeard. So as we got there, the gates, huge drive up to the mansion, huge drive. And you could see these like prefabs all along on the right and the big mansion over there on the left. So we pull up at the mansion and matron's outside waiting to meet us. So she comes out and says hello, and we get Mari out of the car. And Mari starts screaming. It's like she knows. And matron says, "Oh, that's a good pair of lungs, isn't it?" And the social worker says, "Oh, yeah, she can be a little noisy." So I carried her in, and we go to this room on the left. There's a huge table, and there's a man sat out with forms, probably forms to admit her. So I'm kind of, I'm just like silently crying because, I mean, I'm only young, so that's my excuse for not being in control of my emotions. But I was so sad. I couldn't explain to her. And she was sitting on my knee, and she was quite happy then. And then I was going to leave her. So we filled out the forms. We got to the car, and the social worker drives us over to the ward. She pulls out a newspaper and she says, "I'll wait here." So there was a ward sister outside waiting to greet us. They were all very polite, the staff, very nice and very welcoming. I never faulted the staff. It's just the system, isn't it? So I took Mari and I followed her in. And when she opened the door, it was a day room and it was full of children on the floor. And I'd never been in a situation like that. I'd never really worked with many handicapped children. So as I'm walking through, I'm stepping over some children. I'm walking through others, lying on the floor, like smacking their face or banging their head or just rolling. Or there was one who was pulling somebody else's hair and they couldn't stop them. You know, you could just, it was incredibly sad to think that children like from the age of 5 were put in this place to live. And the day room, like you'd have a lounge at home, they have a day room where they're all placed on the floor to spend the day, apart from the toilet and bed. So I walked through with sister, and there's a glass in her office. There's a glass window onto the dormitory, a huge dormitory, and she says to me, "She'll be number 11." Well, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. She'll be number 11. She pointed to a cot on the left in the middle of the dormitory where that was hers, and I just couldn't take it. So I said, "Okay, you know." So I handed Mari over and left. I left. So when I went outside, the social worker sat reading the newspaper, blasé. She said, "Matron wants to see you." So I said, "Okay." Didn't know what she wanted. I didn't bloody care either. So I goes into the mansion again, and Matron's in her office, knock on the door, go in. She says, "Hello, come and sit down," very gentle with me. I like a child standing there crying. And she says to me, "Have you got a job to go to?" So I said, "No." So she said, "Would you like to work here?" Well, it was like she was offering me £1 million. I said, "Work here with these children?" She said, "Yes." A cadet nurse, because I was 17. She said, "Take these forms home and think about it." But I didn't have to think about it. I took the forms. I didn't have to think about it. I knew I was coming back. So this is quite long, isn't it? So Sunday or Monday, I will do part 2. And I hope you've enjoyed this a little bit. Okay, thanks for stopping by. Bye bye.